My name's Daniel Reeve. I turned 42 the year I watched the company I built disappear quietly, legally, and entirely behind my back. It started in a garage, like most things that matter. Two guys, one whiteboard, and too much coffee. We were both 25 when we registered the LLC. I brought the code. Micah brought the sales instinct. We shook hands and said 50-50, always. That was how we ran things lean, scrappy, hopeful. I'd write software until 3 a.m. He'd wake up at 6 to pitch it to someone who didn't know they needed it yet. For a long time, it worked. Our first tool was a small scheduling app for local mechanics ugly as sin, but it worked. Within a year, we were doing contract builds for small businesses that couldn't afford big agency rates. Our revenue was modest, but it was ours. We split everything. We even used the same debit card for supply runs. Micah and I didn't have a formal office. Just two desks and a mini fridge in the back of a print shop owned by his cousin. We ate lunch on the curb out front foil-wrapped burritos and warm Gatorade. And I never once thought to ask if our patents were filed jointly. I just assumed they were. By year 5, we had 3 employees, a decent client base, and our own branded productive streamlined back-office platform for small trade businesses. That product was my baby. I'd written it from scratch during a Christmas break when I skipped the family trip to stay back in code. I named it Anchor because that's what it was meant to: bestable, secure, quietly doing its job. We'd demo Anchor at conferences. Micah always did the pitch. I didn't mind. I wasn't looking for applause. The compliments came later in the form of uptime stats and user retention. That was enough. Then came the venture capital interest. At first, it was flattering. A few well-known names poked around. One firm even flew us out to San Francisco. Micah was energized. I was cautious. We had different ideas about growth, saw scale, I saw support. He wanted a license. I wanted to refine, but I didn't push too hard. We'd made it this far by trusting each other. That trust cost me everything. The first warning sign was a bounce company check. Payroll was late just by a day. Micah said it was a banking error. I believed him. Then I noticed our official email domain had changed. The website was still active, but the backend wasn't mine anymore. Lines of my code had been gutted, rewritten. Some modules were missing entirely. I ran a quiet WHOIS check. The new domain was registered under Micah's name individually. That night, I dug into our filings. I pulled every piece of documentation I could find. Somewhere, in a quiet filing office a month earlier, Micah had restructured the company. He'd transferred the IP Anchor included into a shell entity registered out of Nevada. His name was the sole officer. Mine was nowhere. I didn't cry. I didn't call him. I just sat there at the kitchen table, index finger on the printout, staring at the truth in black and white. It wasn't stolen. It was signed over legally. And the law wouldn't save me from my own blind trust. 3 weeks later, Anchor was sold to a mid-sized software holding company. The announcement came in a press release. They praised innovative design and customer-centric features. My code, my architecture, my late nights in a garage while Micah slept in. There was no mention of me. Friends asked if I was going to sue. I shook my head. No contract can restore what you gave freely, I said. But that didn't mean I was done. No, it just meant I was about to start building something different, something no one could ever take. When people hear what happened, their first question is always the same: why didn't you sue him? And I understand why they ask. In a world built on headlines and retaliation, silence gets mistaken for weakness. But I wasn't silent because I didn't care. I was silent because I cared more than I wanted to admit. Micah and I weren't just business partners. We were friends. He was the best man at my wedding. He helped me move apartments in the rain twice. I knew his parents, his sister, his old dog with a bad hip. So when I found out what he'd done, what he'd signed, moved, sold, it didn't just feel like betrayal. It felt like mourning. I didn't need a lawyer. I needed space. So I packed a bag, turned off my phone, and drove west. No destination, just asphalt and time. I ended up in a town called Harris Point, population just under 9,000. It was the kind of place where people still waved when you passed them on the street, where the diner served coffee that burned your tongue and called it a blessing. I rented a room above a hardware store and started picking up day labor for repair, warehouse inventory, some odd plumbing work. I didn't tell anyone about Anchor or Micah or the lawsuit I didn't file. I just worked. There was something healing about using my hands, about sweating through a job that ended when the sun set, not when an investor deck was finished. I stopped thinking in code. I started thinking in nails, soil, weight. Grief, I've learned, doesn't always show up in tears. Sometimes it shows up in the way you stand still longer than you used to, in the silence between tasks, in the decision to stay quiet when someone says something ignorant, not because you agree, but because you're tired of explaining why you don't. People assume betrayal ignites fire, that it makes you want to scream, burn everything down. But for me, it was different. It made me want stillness, quiet, a version of life that couldn't be manipulated by paperwork filed in a county clerk's office I'd never even seen. I stayed in Harris Point for almost a year. No big moment brought me back. Just a quiet mourning and the realization that I wasn't angry anymore. I was ready, but not to get even. I wanted to build something that couldn't be stripped away. That meant starting with what I still had, my knowledge, my values, and the deep, steady belief that business could be something more than just a transaction. Back home, I rented a small space near the train station. I owned a storefront with peeling paint and a back room just big enough for 6 folding chairs. I named it Groundwork. No flashy logo, no social media launch, just a sign on the door that said, "Start here. Build honest." The idea was simple. Teach people how to run their own business clean, ethical, sustainable from the ground up. Not to scale, not to flip, just to build something they could be proud of. My first class had 3 students. A mechanic who'd been laid off for refusing to lie on a quote. A 19-year-old fresh out of foster care. And a woman in her 50s who'd spent her career at a chain retail store and wanted to open a seamstress shop. I taught what I knew. How to set up an LLC. How to build a client pipeline. The difference between gross and net. But more than that, I taught what I'd learned the hard way about partnerships, contracts, and trust. There was no fee. I operated on donations and side work. Some months were lean, but I didn't mind. I wasn't doing it to win anything. I was doing it to keep from becoming bitter. I'd sit at that folding table with a whiteboard marker in my hand, watching people light up when they realized they could own something. Not just financially, but emotionally, morally, creatively. You can't take that from someone. One evening, after class, the mechanic, his name was Ray, stayed behind. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "You could be out there starting another company, making real money." I smiled. "Because nobody can sell this out from under me," I said. "And because it matters." He nodded. "It does." That's when I knew I was on the right track. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need headlines or a payout or even an apology. What I chose was dignity. Some men go to court to get justice. I went to a folding table with a dry erase board and started again. That, to me, was harder and better, and it worked. The first year of Groundwork was rough financially, emotionally, even logistically. I was working nights at a shipping warehouse just to keep the lights on in the classroom. Most mornings, I'd sweep sawdust out of the back room before setting up the chairs. Some days, no one came. Other days, we had more people than seats, and someone would volunteer to stand. But I didn't quit, not because it was easy, but because it felt right. I started keeping a notebook, a plain black journal I picked up at the corner store. In it, I wrote down the names of every person who showed up to Groundwork, what their dream was, where they were starting from, whether they had $5 or a GED or a second chance. It reminded me that while Micah had taken the tools, he hadn't taken the purpose. He couldn't. That's the thing about values. They don't live in contracts or code. They live in how you show up when you're tired and no one's watching. One of my early students was an Army vet named Sophia. She'd been honorably discharged and was living out of her car when we met. But she had a vision, a small mobile coffee cart that could tour industrial areas and serve third-shift workers who had nowhere else to go. I remember her first week stiff, guarded, clearly expecting judgment. But I didn't see a problem case. I saw potential. I saw someone who knew how to lead, improvise, and survive. By month 3, she had a draft business plan. By month 6, she had a refurbished trailer and a license. We celebrated with stale cookies and lukewarm lemonade, but we celebrated. And that coffee cart? It's now a fleet. 2 trucks, 3 part-time employees. She named it Honor Grounds. She never asked me for a dime. She just kept showing up and building the thing no one could take from her. And that's when I understood something crucial. When you teach someone how to own themselves, really own themselves, doing something bigger than business. You're restoring dignity. Groundwork wasn't flashy. We didn't do TED Talks or make the papers. But we were consistent. Every Tuesday and Thursday, people walked through that weather door and sat down because they wanted more. Not just more money, but more clarity, more freedom, more stability. I taught basics budgeting, contracts, marketing that didn't rely on gimmicks. I also taught the one thing no business school ever seems to cover: what to do when someone betrays you and walks away smiling. Because it happens. It happened to me. And no one should have to walk through that kind of fire alone. One evening after class, a student named Daryl stayed behind. He was a janitor during the day, a musician at heart. He had an idea for a guitar repair business, small, local, maybe even in the garage if he could get a permit. I feel like I'm too late, he told me. I am 48. I should have done this years ago. I handed him a piece of paper. Write the name of the person who told you that, I said. He stared at it for a moment. Then, quietly, he wrote, me. That was the real work we were doing, correcting the lies people told themselves in the dark. I wasn't trying to build a new empire. I was trying to build resilience. And it was working. By year 2, we had a small grant from a retired accountant who sat in on one of our budgeting sessions and liked what he saw. A few local business owners started volunteering their time, teaching lessons on taxes or vendor negotiations. The local library let us use their conference room when we outgrew our original space. Word spread slowly, organically, through whispered recommendations and quiet thank you notes. People started sending their sons, their nieces, their friends who never quite fit into the regular system. And every time someone sat in front of me, eyes full of fear and hope, I saw myself. Not the part that got betrayed, the part that refused to stay broken. Groundwork never had investors. We didn't want them. We weren't scaling, we were serving. We weren't optimizing, we were restoring. You can't pitch that. You just do it. 5 years passed. The notebook I kept grew thicker. The names inside it multiplied. Some stories ended well, some didn't. That's real life. But every single person walked away with more than they came in with. And that more than any product I ever launched, any check I ever cashed, was the success that couldn't be taken. Because it lived in them now. They were the proof. And I had found my peace. There's no ribbon-cutting moment when your life turns a corner. No bright lights or applause when healing quietly takes root. It just happens. You notice the change when you stop flinching at old memories. When the bitterness doesn't rise in your throat every time someone mentions your past. When you catch yourself smiling genuinely, unintentionally, at the way sunlight hits the floor of your small, borrowed office. Groundwork was never supposed to be permanent. At first, it was just a way to put something good in the world, so I wouldn't drown in what had been taken from me. But by year 3, it had become more than that. It was a rhythm, a purpose, a reflection of everything I used to believe and finally believed again. Every season brought new faces. A former nurse who'd lost her job after caring for her dying husband, now determined to open a home-based elder care service. A high school dropout who'd worked 3 jobs but dreamed of opening a landscaping business with his younger brother. A man who had spent 7 years in prison, quietly sketching plans for a mobile bike repair service from his bunk. He brought the paper scraps to class in a shoebox. We didn't fix people. That wasn't our job. We equipped them. We reminded them they weren't too late. That dignity didn't require credentials. That a dream doesn't need to be flashy to be worth chasing. Sometimes they come back months later with a business card, a photo, or just a story. Hey, mister, I filed my first invoice. Or, we made enough to cover rent this month. I'd write their names down in the notebook and underline the date. Each one was a bloom. Quiet. Earned. One evening, I stayed late at the center cleaning up after class. A young woman named Alicia had stayed behind to collect her things. She was sharp, early 20s, full of ideas but afraid of failure. She'd been working on a pitch for a local food delivery business focused on elder-friendly meals. "Do you ever think about what you lost?" she asked suddenly. "Like, if you'd never been betrayed, where you'd be now?" I thought for a moment, then nodded. "Sometimes, but I try to think more about what I built after." She looked puzzled. "Doesn't it make you mad that he just took it?" "It did," I said honestly. But then I realized he only took what had a price tag. He couldn't touch what I believed. He couldn't sell what I learned. She nodded slowly, the way someone does when they're hearing something they're not ready to accept but need to. Before she left, she handed me a drawing hand-sketched branding for her company, with her grandmother's recipe written on the back. "I think I'm going to name it Graceful Eats." "Perfect name," I told her. The following week, a local news outlet did a small piece on groundwork. Just a few minutes during the evening segment, no big splash. But the calls started coming. People asking if we franchised. Investors asking if we'd scale the model. I turned them all down. Groundwork didn't need scaling. It needed to stay small, steady, honest. There was a strange power in not needing more. Because the truth is, what we were doing couldn't be replicated by spreadsheets or shareholder decks. It only worked because it was built on wounds that had healed with care, not cash. We didn't promise success. We promised preparation. We didn't guarantee profits. We guaranteed community. And in that slow bloom over years, not months, I discovered something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not the kind you fake in company retreats or plaster on corporate walls. The kind you feel when your phone doesn't buzz with panic. When people say your name with gratitude, not suspicion. When your value isn't measured in patents or platforms, but in the people who learned how to stand taller because you made time for them. One night, long after everyone had gone home, I stood in that old classroom now, painted, better lit, filled with used but sturdy desks, and I let myself feel it. The slow, powerful truth. This quiet, persistent bloom was the life I'd been trying to build all along. Not one that could be sold or stolen, but one that would keep growing, because it had been rooted in something deeper than profit. It had been built on purpose. It was a Wednesday afternoon in early spring when I saw him again. The sunlight was just starting to hang a little longer in the windows, and the dogwood trees lining the sidewalk outside groundwork had just begun to bud. I was cleaning up after a session on contract basics, just folding chairs and leftover coffee cups, when I heard the door open behind me. I turned, expecting someone from class who'd left something behind. Instead, there stood Micah. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, necessarily, but diminished. The confidence he used to wear like a tailor jacket had worn thin around the edges. His hair was shorter, but less deliberate. His shirt open collar. No tie was wrinkled in a way that didn't read as casual so much as careless. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. He was the first to speak. "Hey," he said, voice soft. "I wasn't sure you'd still be here." "I'm here," I said evenly. He glanced around the room, the chalkboard, the donated bookshelf, the dented filing cabinet in the corner. "This is what you've been doing?" I nodded. "Groundwork. Been running it for a few years now." He stepped inside, letting the door close gently behind him. "I heard about it. A friend of mine, his nephew, came through your program. Said it changed his life." I didn't respond. Micah shifted his weight, hands in his pockets. "Look, I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, and I wouldn't be here unless I didn't have another option." There it was. The ask. I waited. "I got sued," he said quietly, "by the people who bought Anchor. They're claiming I misrepresented the code, didn't disclose bugs, violated licensing agreements. They're trying to bankrupt me." I raised an eyebrow. "Did you?" He hesitated. "Some of the bugs weren't critical. I didn't think they'd matter in the sale. The lawyers are making it bigger than it is." "Is that how it works now?" I asked calm, deciding what matters for someone else. He winced. "I'm not proud of how things went down," he admitted. "I thought at the time I was doing what was best for both of us. That I could cash out, bring you in later once things stabilized. But you never brought me in," I said, not with anger, just fact. "You sold the thing we built without even telling me. You erased me." He nodded slowly. "I know, and I've paid for that, more than you probably realize. There was silence then. Not tense, just full. Finally, he spoke again. I don't have anyone else who understands what Anchor was. I thought maybe you could help. Just talk to the lawyers, maybe write a statement. Explain that the core system worked, that I didn't build it alone. I stared at him for a long while. The part of me that once believed in Micah wanted to say yes. Wanted to believe this was a moment of reconnection or closure or redemption. But I'd spent the last 5 years teaching people the value of their time, their energy, their name. And that meant I couldn't give mine away, not even for an old friend's panic. You came here, I said finally, because you thought I might still be the guy who'd fix your problems. He said nothing. But that man doesn't work for you anymore, I added. Micah's shoulders sagged. For a second, I saw something familiar in his eyes. Guilt, maybe. Regret. Or just the weight of finally running out of places to hide. I get it, he said. I just didn't know where else to go. I nodded once. There's a legal aid clinic 2 blocks down. Tell them you need business defense. They'll point you in the right direction. He looked at me again, really looked and nodded. Thanks. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry. I hope you mean that, I said. He turned, opened the door, paused. You did something good here, Daniel, he said. Better than we ever did with Anchor. Then he was gone. I stood alone in the quiet afterward, the door swinging shut with a soft click. And I felt still. Not triumphant. Not vindicated. Just settled. Micah's crisis didn't shake me. His words didn't move me. His apology didn't restore anything I'd lost. But his arrival, his need, his brokenness, that told me something I hadn't expected. I'd built something stronger than success. I'd built integrity. And that, I realized, was the one thing no one could ever sell out from under me. Not long after Micah left, I found myself sitting in the back of the groundwork classroom alone one evening, watching the sunlight filter through the windows and spill across the floor like it had something gentle to say. There was a stillness in that room I hadn't felt in years. Not just quiet, but earned calm. Micah's visit didn't leave a mark the way I thought it might. Instead, it gave shape to something I'd felt forming for a to me, a kind of internal confirmation that the old life, the old version of myself, the hunger for validation or being seen, it was all behind me now. What mattered was what I was building, what I had built. That weekend, we held Groundwork's 5th-year gathering. Nothing fancy, just an open house and potluck. There were aluminum trays of homemade casseroles, lemonade in plastic pitchers, and a big banner across the front of the room. 5 years of building what lasts. People came from all over. Some had driven in from neighboring counties, others just walked from a few blocks away. The room filled with laughter, hugs, old jokes, and new introductions. I watched as Sophia, the Army vet turned coffee truck owner, shared tips on mobile food permits with a first-time attendee. Daryl, the late bloomer guitar tech, brought his teenage nephew, talking proudly about our shop like it was the Taj Mahal. No one asked about my past. No one mentioned Anchor. The name hadn't passed my lips in almost 2 years, and that felt exactly right. Instead, they talked about their journeys, their resilience, their futures. Toward the end of the night, I was handed a manila envelope by a woman I didn't recognize. Mid-30s, polite smile, quiet demeanor. My sister asked me to drop this off, she said. She couldn't make it tonight. Inside was a typed letter. The return address read, State Women's Correctional Facility. It was from one of our early students, someone who had drifted from the program quietly, then reappeared in headlines later for white-collar fraud. Her letter wasn't asking for help. It was full of reflection, of regrets. But most of the lit was full of clarity. She wrote, I've lost years I'll never get back, but I remember how I felt at Groundwork. Like I wasn't being judged for where I'd come from, but guided towards something better. That feeling had stuck. I want you to know that, even if I failed to live up to it. I folded the letter, placed it in the drawer next to my notebook, and sat for a long time in silence. See, that's the thing about legacy. It isn't always loud. It isn't always immediate. And it sure as hell isn't something you can measure in profit and loss columns. Legacy lives in the things that echo back when you're not chasing them. It lives in the way people say your name when you're not in a room. It lives in the systems that still function because you built them with intention. And it lives in moments unexpected, quiet, deeply human when someone reminds you that what you started didn't just serve a purpose. It started a chain reaction. Months passed. The grant funding we'd received expanded. Groundwork added 2 part-time instructors, both former students. We began hosting monthly micro-forums where local business owners and community leaders met with students. No sales pitches, no hidden agendas, just stories and advice. We published our first simple workbook, Start Clean, Build True. It wasn't a bestseller, but it found its audience quietly, like everything else we did. And through it all, I kept that same notebook, same pen, same promise to write down every single name, dream, and turning point. By the 5th page from the back, I realized something. This was the company I had always wanted to build. Not the one with scalable technology or exponential growth, but the one that stood quietly in the corner when someone needed hope. One evening, I looked around the office, new paint, a few donated desks, kids' drawings tacked on the bulletin board, and I smiled to myself. Micah had once said that what we'd built together was going to change the world. He wasn't entirely wrong. It did change a world. Mine. And in doing so, it gave others the blueprint to build something just as unshakable. No patents, no product launches, just purpose, just peace. And if you ask me what I walked away with after losing everything, I'll tell you this. I didn't lose. I traded up, because the life I have now, it can't be sold. It can't be stolen. It doesn't need defending in court. It was built one conversation, one name, one act of integrity at a time. That's not a business model. That's a legacy. In the years since Groundwork began, I've often been asked if I ever considered returning to the corporate world. The answer is always the same. I've learned more here, in this modest space with its mismatched chairs and whiteboards stained with old markers, than I ever did in any boardroom. Business school taught me about market analysis, financial forecasting, and strategic planning. But it didn't teach me how to rebuild after betrayal. It didn't prepare me for the silence that follows when a trusted partner walks away with everything you built together. What I've come to understand is that the most valuable lessons in business and in life aren't found in textbooks or lectures. They're learned through experience, through failure, and through the quiet determination to keep moving forward. One of the first things I teach at Groundwork is the importance of integrity, not just as a moral compass, but as a practical business strategy. Because when everything else falls apart, your integrity is what remains. I also emphasize the value of community. In the early days, I tried to do everything alone, believing that self-reliance was the key to success. But I've learned that collaboration, support, and shared knowledge are what truly sustain a business. Perhaps the most profound lesson I've learned is about resilience. Not the kind that's about pushing through at all costs, but the quiet, steady resilience that comes from knowing who you are and what you stand for. These lessons weren't taught in any classroom I sat in. They were learned here, among people striving to build something meaningful, often with limited resources but unlimited determination. And so, when I reflect on what business school didn't teach me, I realize that it was here, in this humble setting, that I truly learned what it means to build something lasting, not just in terms of profit, but in purpose and impact. Peace doesn't arrive with fanfare. It slips in quiet line a Tuesday morning. Maybe when you sip your coffee and realize the old weight on your chest is gone. You're not bracing anymore. You're not watching the door, waiting for the next betrayal or setback. You're just living. It took me years to get there. Even after Groundwork was up and running, even after the student success stories, the grants, the quiet nods of respect from people who once doubted Med here was still a part of me that flinched when I saw Micah's name in an email or when I caught a glimpse of the old company's logo on a product I used to be proud of. But one morning, while walking to the center with a bag of donated books slung over my shoulder, I passed a group of kids walking to school. One of them held a lunch bag with Anchor Tech printed on the side. He wasn't thinking about betrayal or IP theft. He was just a kid with a sandwich and a math test ahead of him. And that's when I realized something simple and freeing. They had taken the company, but I had taken a lesson. I turned it into something that couldn't be replicated or stolen. Groundwork was more than a program. It was a testament to the idea that you could lose nearly everything and still come out with your integrity, and that in time, integrity would pay dividends profit never could. That's the quiet triumph. Not revenge, not courtroom victories, but knowing you stayed the course when it would have been easier to break. I didn't end up rich, but I ended up respected. And peace, in the end, didn't look like a mansion or a private jet. It looked like the handwritten card a single mom left on my desk after she launched her small sewing business. Thank you for giving me permission to try again. It looked like the quiet handshake from a man who once thought no one would hire him because of a prison record and now ran a bike repair shop out of his garage. It looked like every name in my notebook underlined with a date and a smiley face because they'd done it. They built something in, so had I. Micah never reached out again after that day. I heard through someone that he'd moved out of state, started something new. Maybe he learned. Maybe he didn't. But I had. And that was enough. In the final analysis, I never got back what I lost. But I gained something better. I gained clarity, purpose, a deeper understanding of what it means to build something that outlasts the storm. And when people ask me today what I do, I don't talk about revenue or metrics or exit strategies. I just say, I help people start over. Because that's what I did. And that's how I won.